Welcome, one and all. My name is Terry Schmidt. I am the Executive Director of the Connecticut Council for Interreligious Understanding. We are a small organization made up of 9 different religions, and we think we do a reasonable job of representing what Connecticut looks like and is like today in terms of its religious reality. We are an educational organization, though. We are interested in teaching people so that they might not be quite as religiously illiterate as most of us are, even those of us who try. We are really, really glad to see you here this evening. Let me do this introduction for a couple of reasons. Ann Oliva, these are all board members of CCIU. Ann Oliva, former chair. Malou Dusin, Ann Oliva is a member of the Baha'i faith. Next to her is Malou Dusin, one of our co-chairs. She's a Buddhist. Next to her is Bruce Steinway, our other co-chair. Those are our 2 co-chairs. Bruce is a Christian minister. Next is Radhakrishnan, one of our longtime members. He is Hindu. Next is, I switched them. H-I-J. You got to switch. For Muslim or Islam? Well, no, switch. Yeah, that depends. So if I speak about the person, I'm speaking about a Muslim, and she should be over here. But if I speak about the religion, the faith, it's Islam, and so you get moved up. Ida Mansour, who is a Muslim and practices the faith of Islam. Next is Piyush Shah, our secretary. He is from the Jain religion. Next is Rita Miller, who is Jewish, representing Judaism. Ritu Zazzaro in front of me, who is a Sikh. And finally, Greg Dupuy, and Greg is a Unitarian Universalist. Ann?
From the gleanings of the writings of Baha'u'llah, prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, deal ye with one another with the utmost love and harmony, with friendliness and fellowship. This goal excelleth every other goal, and this aspiration is the monarch of all aspirations.
A Buddhist prayer. With wise reflection, I eat this food only to maintain this body, to stay alive and healthy, and to support the spiritual life.
For what we are about to receive, O Lord, make us truly thankful and mindful of the needs of others for Jesus' sake.
For the blessing today, I invoke a passage from Hindu scripture, the Rig Veda. The verse is in English. I will do the translation in English, but the verse is going to be in Sanskrit. Om Wodsworth Vadarvarenyam Vargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaha Prachodayahad Om Abhavo Jodirasaha Amradam Brahma Bodhvavaswaru. We meditate on the glory of the Creator, who has created the universe, the embodiment of knowledge and light, and the remover of sin and ignorance. May He enlighten our intelligence. We ask the Supreme to bless this food we are about to eat and help us to be united with the Brahman. Peace, peace, peace.
In the Islamic tradition, we are reminded in the Quran of God's amazing bounty, the diversity of foods that are provided for us. We are reminded to be responsible and not to be wasteful, to consider those in need of a meal, to reflect on this and to be grateful to God as we eat. And so before we eat, we say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of the one God, the most gracious, the most merciful.
Jai Jinendra. Thank you, God. Thank you, teachers. And thank you, religion, for everything we have, including food, family, and friends.
Please join me if you'd like. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Guru Granth Sahib, our holy scripture for Sikhism, says about the theme of love thy neighbor, Jano jot na pucho jati, age jat na hai. Recognize the Lord's light, spirit within all, and do not consider social class or status. There are no classes or castes in the world hereafter.
May our meal together make us aware of the interconnected web of the existence that sustains us. May we be worthy of and grateful for our blessings. Amen.
Amen. Oh. Okay, could I have the first set of speakers to come forward, please? So just one little bit about CCIU and then some instructions for all of us for this evening. We are really thrilled that you are here. We try to do these kinds of events. We invite people to share with one another civilly, with open minds. I suspect that everybody in this room is here because they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to think. Tonight we are responding to our culture and to our times. We really think that this is a time where we need not only to be aware of our neighbors, to love our neighbors, but to be aware of an ability to communicate with others with whom we have differences. Maybe different perspectives, different backgrounds, all sorts of differences that might otherwise cause us to fear or be unaware or unloving. And we're inviting us to do something else. We're coming here because we believe in speaking as opposed to shouting. We believe in listening to one another as opposed to merely reacting to each other. We believe in trying to learn and grow as opposed to rant and rave. And we think that our culture desperately needs people to do that these days, to invite people to come to learn and grow in a forum where we can be with one another. So, on to our speakers. Rafai, go to that. Go to that one.
Respected clergy, community leaders, friends, and neighbors, good evening. Like so many of you, it's with a heavy heart that I address you, still aching from this morning's news. We are fortunate. In addition to what Terry mentioned, we're fortunate to also be in such a gathering, consisting of different colors, ethnicities, backgrounds, races, ideas, but neighbors nonetheless. Neighbors not because we live next to each other, that doesn't really make you neighbors, but because we care about each other. We see the humanity in each other's eyes. We don't know much about that shooter. I'm not a politician, so I'll just call him a terrorist. But I can say with full confidence that he didn't see the dignity of the common human experience when he did what he did. Our faiths teach us differently. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was with his companions, a Jewish funeral procession passed by, and he stood up immediately out of respect for the deceased. His companions said in a casual way, he was a Jewish man, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, responded, was he not a soul? People say we need to accept the new normal of terrorism and shootings. At moments like this, and days like today, I think my prescription is the opposite. I need to be in this gathering with these people, all of you, my people, who see my humanity. We see the humanity of people, whether they're black or white, whether they are documented or not documented. But at least, at a bare minimum, we see each other's humanity. And in other words, I feel that I am among neighbors. So, in my perspective, that's what it means to be among neighbors. I want to tell all of you, I think on days like today, you have a tendency that, crisis causes us to bare our souls. So I want to tell all of you that I love all of you. And I hope that you feel the same way towards me. And I also pray that God blesses this country and all of us, and keeps us all safe and protects all of us, and provides us with guidance to the straight path. So hopefully we'll go from there. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you to Terry Schmidt and all the organizers. What a wonderful gathering. My name is State Senator Beth Bai, and I bring greetings from Nancy Wyman. I can't do a really good impression, otherwise I would. I currently work in government as a state senator, as a politician. I believe in that role. Our job is to look out for the common good and represent our neighbors. In 2017, there are many reasons to be discouraged about what loving thy neighbor means in our current political landscape. I have 3 examples. Gun violence. Our political class keeps failing to address this, and many suffer. After Sandy Hook in Connecticut, we passed bipartisan gun safety legislation, but on a national level, the NRA continues to fight for profits over love thy neighbor, the worst of government. Yet love thy neighbor implies keeping our friends and neighbors safe. Another example is that corporate profits are at an all-time high, their highest since 1929, while wages and benefits for the average worker stagnate or slide backwards. Yet love thy neighbor implies shared prosperity, living wages, and a limit to greed at the top. In Connecticut, educational inequality is growing with no political solution in sight. But loving thy neighbor implies wanting a great education for all, not just for our children and for our grandchildren, but for all. Accepting that there may be political or government solutions to improve these problems implies that those of us in government must have a role in enabling policies that help us love thy neighbor. Government is a covenant in that it is a promise that we will take care of each other. It requires everyone's participation versus discouragement and disengagement. Let's talk about taxes and government, right? A lot of talk about taxes, but taxes fund programs that take care of seniors, people who are struggling with mental health challenges and developmental disabilities, the disenfranchised, programs that care for our neighbor. Taxes also fund infrastructure that connects us, roads, bike lanes, buses, public transport, sidewalks. So many needs we have as a community, but who decides and how do we decide what to fund and who to take care of? The fact that Nancy Wyman isn't here right now and that we have such a difficult budget stalemate give you an indication of how difficult those conversations are. Who is worthy and who is not worthy of services? Today I was with students at the University of St. Joseph who are barely hanging on, putting themselves through college, and the current budget that passed slashed all the financial aid and gets rid of the program into the future. UConn and UConn Medical School cut, the Bioscience Initiative cut. These are covenants and promises we've made that we are going to work on healing, that we're going to support higher education. But from my perspective, that covenant has been broken of love thy neighbor and help others. Tonight is such a wonderful opportunity to bring us together, to remind us the best of all, to love thy neighbor. I'm here to say government has a role too, and you have a role in helping us and holding us accountable to love thy neighbor. we need more nights like tonight, and I'm just so happy to have been invited to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Marc Sheinberg. I'm the president of Goodwin College on the other side of the river. I'm very honored to be here, and I feel incredibly unworthy to be here to speak to this group in particular for all that you all do every day. I would ask if we can share one thing tonight, is that we try to find ways to risk kindness. We so rarely risk being kind anymore, being vulnerable in our love, because we're so worried about it not being given back in return. I think that the most dangerous word in the English language is them. Them is the toughest word at all because it almost casually separates us and dehumanizes the other. It makes it easier when we're at our most tribal to demonize someone that's not like us. In a world of social media, even our sense of searching for answers provides only other opportunities to have our own thoughts reflected and even amplified instead of finding those things that we're trying to find. They asked us to give maybe an example of something that we might have experienced personally in this. And so you could talk about the big things. I've traveled to as many countries as I can trying to figure out what I don't know and embrace my ignorance about all the things that happen in the world that we see reflected and filtered through media and other places. And invariably, I just come back understanding how much more ignorant I am about how the world is really not the place that people make it out to be, and people are just people everywhere. But recently, we actually had a Syrian family that the college adopted. And they came to us not speaking English, 2 parents and 3 kids, 1 kid missing who could not get a basic medication while he was still in a refugee camp to be allowed to stay alive. And the family came to us, as I said, not speaking English. And the father, who is a chef in Syria, we took on as a cleaner with some other people that were able to speak Arabic. And got a lot of flack at first because it was taking on so much, people thought. And so here we have this family that took about 4 or 5 months in for the man to actually tell me in English how much he appreciated what was being done for him and how much it had changed his life and his family's life. And we had shared in this family with a church at Coventry. And a couple of weeks ago, my facilities department, unbeknownst to me, went over to the church and actually redid all their floors and redid all their, basically their sanctuaries, because they wanted to say thank you for the church, for putting us in the position where we could be made this more human by having reached out this far. The only antidote to what's happening in the world is meaningful and deep conversation. Not conversation about what people think, but why they feel it. What is the core of what makes people nervous, what makes people feel different or alone? Eventually, if we dig deep enough, we'll find the unifying whole, the unifying reality, the center that makes us all the same. I appreciate being here tonight, and I appreciate so much being able to be a small part of a real meaningful conversation. And I also appreciate the opportunity to risk kindness. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Tonight, instead of the public information officer me, you're going to get the storyteller me. It has taken me several years to learn who I am and the path I am supposed to follow, and to have that same faith and confidence in myself that others had in me. I originally became a police officer because I needed a job. I found law enforcement interesting, but decided it would only be my job and not my career. I planned to stay 5 years, and in those 5 years, pursue a master's degree, then move on to my real career. This proved much easier said than done, since I absolutely loved what I was doing. I was quickly promoted to detective and assigned to the Youth Bureau, where I investigated crimes against juveniles. 5 years came and went, still no master's degree, but I did leave the Naugatuck Police Department. I wanted to grow in my profession and take on new challenges, so I became a Connecticut State Trooper. One of those challenges was to become a Connecticut State Police major crime detective. State Police major crime detectives were, and still are, considered the best of the best, and I wanted to be one. After becoming a Connecticut State Trooper, I was first assigned to patrol and as a resident state trooper, then the Governor's Security Unit and the Public Information Office, to name a few. I applied and interviewed for my dream assignment, major crime, 3 times in 10 years with no luck. But little did I know that during that first interview in 2004, my state police career would be determined. The state police lieutenant that conducted that major crime interview felt I was not right for major crime, obviously. But several months later, he had the opportunity to assign me to a resident state trooper's office, and then a few months after that, recommend me for the governor's detail for Jody Rao. The lieutenant made his way through the ranks and has since retired, but has remained one of my biggest supporters and has never lost faith or confidence in me. We did not know one another when I went to that first interview in 2004, but he was able to look past that moment and see my potential. That same potential that 11 years later allowed others to trust I would succeed in the Public Information Office when I was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. As the lieutenant and I got to know one another over the years, the support and confidence in me became stronger, and he expected me to have that same amount of confidence in myself that he had in me, because he saw that I didn't have it. My assignment to the Public Information Office is the one place I never considered myself. I was dead set on major crime. As it turned out, not only did I really enjoy representing the state police, but the role surprisingly suited me. The past couple of years have certainly challenged me to be the person I didn't realize I already was. I had no idea I could run the Public Information Office. I truly feel I was able to accomplish this challenge because of the people who believed in me. My confidence and strength initially came from them. Now it comes from me too. I've learned many lessons along the way. One of the important ones, if someone starts you on a path, follow it. I've spent the past 8 years officially assigned to the Public Information Office, only leaving for short periods to fill temporary assignments. However, my focus always remained on major crime, and every time I left major crime, I veered off that path. I was brought back on to the right path, which was public information. I'm not standing here today because this is the path I chose. I'm standing here today because this is the path someone else unknowingly chose for me. After accepting that this was my path, I made it wider, I made it longer, I made it stronger, and I made it my own because someone else had the faith and confidence in me, which made me have faith and confidence in myself. Thank you.
Good evening, neighbors. Yes. First thing, it's a privilege and honor and a humbling experience to be here. I don't know if I've done anything worthwhile, deserving, that brought me here. Anyway, what does love thy neighbor mean to us, and what is neighbor? I'm going to just share with you a couple of stories and let you interpret my position on this subject. First one, we all, or most of us, can actually recollect where we were when 9/11 happened. I was traveling for work to Florida, and we got trapped in the hotel where the conference was going on. My neighbor from work who traveled with me, a 6'2" Christian ex-military, held my hand and said, "I will take you home." You know, by that time, the hate crime had started, and Northeast was worst hit with a fatality in Mesa, Arizona. My family was really scared. 3 days later, when we were free to move, we rented a car. We drove back for 2 days. We went through drive-thrus for food. He did not want to expose me to any element that could hurt me. We took a deviation of more than 100 miles so that we could stay at his sister's house, and not have to stay in a hotel. That's love thy neighbor. Love is an unconditional attitude to help somebody with no expectation in return. Every year on 9/11, we spend an hour on the phone, we talk about love, life, blessings of the God. That's the bond we have built. Me with his family and he with my family. The second instance, I had just taken over to be head of the department, and December 21st, I greeted one of my fellow workers, Merry Christmas. 15 minutes later, I get a call from HR. Can I see you in my office? I had never met HR before. He had never met me. I walked onto his office. I enter his office and he looks at me. And then he looks at the other guy. And then again looks at me and smiles. And then looks at my Christian coworker and he said, he greeted you Merry Christmas. Yeah. Look, if you had greeted him Merry Christmas and he had complained, I could understand. What's the fuss about? And I look at him, I said, I'm here because he's complaining. I greeted him Merry Christmas. I grew up in India. In my neighborhood, there was no Christian, and I greeted everybody Merry Christmas. Now I'm in the US and I have to say Happy Holidays. Are we talking about inclusion here? Are we talking about respect, exclusion? What's the topic of discussion here? And then I looked at my coworker's eyes and I said, if it's your birthday, should I greet you happy birthday or should I say happy holiday? If I can wish you happy birthday on your birthday, why can I not greet you Merry Christmas on Christmas? He came to me next day and he said, Rippy, you opened my eyes. I said, thank you. 6 months later, I got a call from HR saying, we are rewriting our curriculum on diversity and inclusion, and we would like you to be a part of the team that's developing that content. Would you please find time to do it? I said, sure, I would. Thank you very much. My name is Rippy Singh, and I'm a Sikh by faith.
Good evening. I'm Howard Savronsky. I'm the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. Can we really expect to love our neighbor without first dating? Is it realistic to believe that just because we're neighbors, we can love one another? Well, this is the challenge we faced. Like many relationships that ultimately led to love, ours began at the movies. It was 5 years ago, following a movie at the Jewish Film Festival about a friendship between a Muslim and a Jewish teenagers who lived in Brooklyn, that a group of local Muslim and Jewish teens gathered to enjoy a slice of pizza, a glass of soda, and get to know one another on a more personal level. It went so well that when their parents came to pick them up and saw the positive connections that they were making, the adults saw an opportunity and decided it would be wonderful for them to also meet and get to know one another. And it was then that the Brunch Bunch was born. For the next 5 years, and to the present, every 6 weeks, a small group of Jewish and Muslim couples, sometimes singles, meet at someone's home, share a potluck brunch consisting of a smorgasbord of ethnic dishes and incredible desserts, and engage in substantive conversation. But it wasn't always like that. The dating phase of our relationship began slowly. At first, conversations was limited to safe topics, such as food and family and life cycle events. It took nearly 2 years before folks felt comfortable to venture into conversations about politics and theology. It was the war between Israel and Gaza over 3 years ago that challenged the group to venture into conversations that previously were thought to be too controversial. However, by that time, our bonds were getting stronger, our respect for one another was unquestionable, and our personal connections deeper. We began to feel like a family that had differences, but a family that embraced the value of civil conversation built on respect and compassion. Sometime later, in honor of Ramadan, we held a community iftar at Beth Israel Synagogue, where our Muslim friends taught us about their faith, their prayer rituals, and customs. It was obvious how many similarities we shared, how many values and traditions we shared, and how much alike we are as people. We spent the rest of the evening sharing a meal together, getting to know one another, and mostly telling stories of our families, our professional lives, and making connections that extended far beyond any label that you would attach. Last year, the Federation arranged for a group of Muslim and Jewish women to travel here from Afula, Israel, our sister city. They came to form a bridge between our two communities by sharing their love of ethnic cooking. We gathered at the Farmington Valley American Muslim Center, a group of Muslims and Jews who, together with our guests, prepared traditional Arab and Israeli dishes. We got covered with flour, probably tasted more ingredients while assembling the dishes than finally landed in the dish. We had a ball. As the afternoon hour arrived, according to tradition, we were all invited into the room reserved for prayer. We explained that Jews are also expected to pray in the afternoon, and when we compared our unique rituals and liturgy, it was yet another illustration of how much we share. We sat quietly while our friends prayed, and when they finished, we joined in a universal prayer for peace and harmony. Following afternoon prayer, in accordance with Muslim and Jewish tradition, we ate. As word of our group began to percolate within the community, more people expressed interest in joining. The brunch has now grown. We now have 2 groups meeting on a regular basis. Civil discourse is at the core of our relationship. We are now comfortable discussing and learning about complex issues each of us face. Bridging our 2 communities and forging these relationships makes us stronger and safer. When our Muslim friends felt threatened by growing anti-Islam statements and actions, we were there lending our voice at the Capitol. Last year, we participated along with many other faith groups in a solidarity event at a local mosque. And when our Jewish community was victimized by anti-Semitic acts and speech, our Muslim friends were there to express their support and comfort. To quote a great theologian, great statesman, a humanitarian, civil rights activist, a really, really good-looking guy, Deacon Art Miller, if you want to move fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. We have progressed beyond our first date and now can sincerely declare that we do love our neighbors. We also know that we want to go to the distance, go together holding hands for the entire world to see. We are one family. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Tom Lohman, and I'm the director of the Wodsworth Athenaeum. A place for art on Main Street. How simple and familiar that sounds. Who of us hasn't lived with a public sculpture on the town green, the handsome facade of a Carnegie library, or stood in the shadow of a soaring steeple of a meeting house? This is the American townscape. Yet 175 years ago, much as today, including an art museum within this litany is a rarity. Rather, art has been variously reviled, excluded, and met with suspicion and hostility in Anglo-American communities for the majority of these 4 centuries of our pilgrim experiment. In considering tonight's theme, Love Thy Neighbor, I asked myself, how better could I do my part than to use this moment to evangelize? I'm the only non-licensed preacher. but evangelize with a story of radical philanthropy. For philanthropy, all of you who studied Greek know, is a word that embodies loving thy neighbor. So I hope you'll forgive me that this reflection reflects back on the institution I now steward. Perhaps as early as 1807, Daniel Wodsworth felt a yearning to use part of his significant wealth to establish a greater presence for the art of his time, an emerging American art scene of which he was a minor exponent was developing, and he felt compelled to explore a way for art to become a more public conversation. He was just coming into his own then, but took pains to get the painters, writers, and architects then transiting up and down the former colonies to spend a while in Connecticut, to make those efforts that they were making accessible, to share their art, their gift, given in vulnerability, to the world with our greater society. In his later years, eager to set things on a fertile platform, he did the most illogical and perhaps improbable thing. He tore down his family homestead, the house in which he was reared, the house where George Washington proposed that his father bankroll the American Revolution, the house kitty corner to the center church where he prayed. And he commissioned the best architects he could find to build on that spot an art museum. The intended permanence of this new thing, an art museum in America, was ensured by its granite blocks, the assembling of about a dozen community leaders as his co-conspirators in this enterprise, and the munificence of that founding generation, as well as these 8 generations that have followed. And but 100 years later, John Pierpont Morgan fundamentally refounded our institution with a massive gift of a new building and 1,350 works of art from across world experience and cultures that we celebrate this autumn with an exhibition. And so when I think of love thy neighbor, I am strengthened and centered in considering our place for art on Main Street. I find myself in awe of how it has become a place of self-discovery, questioning, and joy, of how everyone has a chance at getting closer to their own humanity as they look into the art of the past, the art of today, the art of their memory, and someone else's art. Can we make good on the promise of it? We're here to try, and in trying, show that love, that vulnerability, that humility of its foundation. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Leslie Torres Rodriguez, and I am the superintendent, proud superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. And I need to start by letting you know that I am a spiritual person. Since I was a young girl, I can always remember and still do feel and every day admire the personal connection and intimate connection that I have with a higher being. And that is partly why I, in my daily life, as a person responsible for the education of 21,000 beautiful and capable students, that is why I take a humanistic approach to the work that I do. Through my leadership, I seek to shape an organizational culture so that the work that everyone in Hartford Public Schools do every day honors the voices of each and every one of our students and their families. Our schools should be places of safety and learning, where we lift our students, show them that they can be resilient, show them that their voices can have significant power. We want to create strong foundations for our students so that they can thrive and then go on to transform other lives. That is why we must operate from a value set that honors the existence, the lives, the experiences, and the voices of the people that we serve. One challenge that I see in our society is that we lack a collective honoring of the individual, of that lifting, that listening. In education, that translates into inequitable access to high-quality teaching and learning. Why is it that some neighbors, some students, do not have what others do? If we are failing some of our neighbors, some of our students, where is our love? Why is it not working? Where is the equity? And I ask about love and equity together because I see love as a resource, a humanistic resource. And in honoring the lives and the voices of the students and families, in helping them succeed, we must use any and all resources available. And because love is a resource, we cannot waste it. So when I contextualize love, love thy neighbor, then I, as an educational leader, must create conditions that humanize our students and their communities. Despite narratives of an inability to achieve at high levels, we must deliver to all of our students equitable access to high-quality teaching and learning. I take that humanistic approach and stance partly because of my own tapestry of my own stories. I moved to Hartford from Puerto Rico with my mother and my brother when I was 9 years old. You know, our family living in that one small, cramped, one-bedroom apartment, a child of poverty, one who didn't have access to books, one who didn't speak English, feeling alone and scared in this strange new place. But then the love came. The love came from my first American teacher, Mrs. Rivera, happened to be a Latina. Not only spoke my language, my native language, but she saw me as an individual. She listened to my needs. She heard my voice and gave me the love that I needed at that very crucial time in my life. Or the story of my mother who left her homeland in search of a safer future, who needed to humbly seek access and accept neighborhood resources, and the community, the neighbor that invested their resources in us. A story of vulnerability, an asset that many, many children and families in Hartford carry with them. My mother's vulnerability, her commitment to her children, the vulnerability of the disenfranchised became my humbleness. That is what fuels me and my leadership, my personal and professional imperative every single day. Stories of a teacher's, a mother's, a community's actions. That is loving thy neighbor, loving it in action. And when you think about the beautiful and the capable students that we serve, it is making a connection at the very human level, sharing that experience, the listening and the honoring, because when you honor, you love. So as an educational leader, I, a product of the very community that I am privileged to serve, can only identify with that humbling voice of love. But also, I can also identify with the fact that the disenfranchised student, when loved by thy neighbor, regardless and nevertheless, can and will achieve at high levels. So loving thy neighbor is the most valuable resource that we have. Thank you.
Good evening. It is an honor and a privilege to read Susan Campbell's words this night, and I will confess, maybe like some of you, I've always wanted to be Susan Campbell. Right. I'm a big fan, she is right, because she has dedicated her work and her life to shine a light on love and on neighbors and on the call to justice. So this is the story she wanted us to hear tonight as we reflect on loving your neighbor. These are Susan's words. I was among the army of journalists who went to New York after the September 11th attacks. I was there 3 days after, but the air still smelled like gunpowder. Even that soon after the day that changed everything, I was disheartened to read the rhetoric that was circulating already, unlearned rhetoric that was hurtful to Muslims and consequently we non-Muslims as well. After my time in New York, I ended up with a persistent cough that my friend reminded me had started with my trip. And this was months later. I went to my doctor who sent me to a pulmonologist, at which point I thought, cool, I get to add a pulmonologist to my medical team, which up to that point had consisted of my primary care physician and my dentist. I walked into the pulmonologist's office and began to answer his questions. As he was examining me, I mentioned that I'd been to New York after the terrorist attacks, and the issues with my lungs appeared to start soon after. I'd already been reading about the effect of the air at Ground Zero, though I suspected my dose had been minor. When I said that, the doctor's face softened, and he sat down. Right there, I thought I had a problem. I'd never had a doctor sit down with me in his or her office. I figured he was about to deliver some horrible health news. But he wasn't. The doctor was Muslim, and we began to talk about what was happening around the nation in regard to what people thought they knew about Islam. I am a graduate of Hartford Seminary and was at the time of my doctor visit. But that talk with that doctor solidified for me my role as a member of the Free Press. We spent 45 minutes talking, honestly talking. I don't remember precisely what we said. I don't know how many patients piled up in his waiting room, but I will never, ever forget the grace shown to me by Dr. Saad Anwar in that horrible time. That conversation gave me strength, and it gave me the rock from which to jump into the public discourse about religion and war and peace. I've never regretted that jump, and I'm not sure I would have made that jump without that pivotal conversation with Dr. Anwar, who has since, and I hope I'm not taking license here, become a friend. You never know the effects your words will have. You just never know. Thank you, Dr. Anwar. Thank you, Susan.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Oz Grable. I'm with the Metro Hartford Alliance. And first, like everyone else here, I salute Terry and everyone who organized this. I know we'll all leave here as a result of these remarks tonight, energized and more optimistic, notwithstanding the various challenges we face both in the state and elsewhere. So thank you for that, Terry and everyone else who organized it. I've been a privilege to, I like this 4-minute rule. I've had the privilege of hearing Deacon Art Miller speak. And I'd say, Art, I hope you get inspired by the 4-minute rule. It's a great idea. I think the baskets would overflow. In thinking about this, try to come up with two perspectives on love thy neighbor. One is the singular and the other is plural. And on the singular side, I was raised as a Roman Catholic, so the first time that I heard love thy neighbor was probably as a kid in the story of the Good Samaritan, which still 60 some odd years later is one of those challenges in life that I don't quite grasp. And the story of the Marine who helped Regi back is one of those things that I find inspiring, because I'm not sure I could ever get there. That word no exceptions caught me off guard. I'm thinking, wow, I got a few exceptions I could list in love thy neighbor. And so I'm inspired by people who can do the little things in life, like greet someone with a smile in the morning, to shake someone's hand and demonstrate respect for that individual, and communicate a sense of community that we're all in this together, whether that lasts 2 seconds in an elevator or passing in the street. The things in life are those little things in life are the grease that make our social wheels go round and round. And when Terry suggested stories, I'm not sure I have a story, but when I think about other people who've inspired me, I think of the people who served my mother, who was stricken with a stroke at age 65 and lived the last 15 years of her life with significant limitations on her speech and mobility. And I'll always remember the people from the very first day after the stroke, the speech therapists and the physical therapists, all the people who worked with her, including those who took care of her at the very end of her life in a nursing home, who treated her with dignity, who treated her with humor, and no matter what her attitude was on a given day, never let that attitude, when it was negative, affect theirs. And many of these folks, or individuals who are probably not earning a great deal of money, many of them who are coming in as first jobs in this country, inspired me to say, when those folks can do that in the most difficult situations, then maybe I need to reconsider that my approach to that no exception rule. The other idea of loving thy neighbor is with an S, and that's in some of the things that have been talked about up here, and that's the social and political responsibilities we have to one another, regardless of whether we know one another, whether that's persons across the street or around the world. And the idea that politics, broadly defined as the art of the possible, calls us to responsibility, to understand not only what other differences are, but where our responsibilities are to address the issues that we face, whether that's the kind of tragedy we face today or helping people out in Puerto Rico or addressing some of these inequities that have been talked about up here. And so I close with a prayer that I picked up about 40 years ago. It's attributed to the Christophers. I don't know if that order is even around anymore, but it goes simply like this. Lord, make us more energetic in setting right what we find wrong with the world instead of complaining about it. Nourish in us a practical desire to build up rather than tear down, to reconcile instead of polarize, and to go out on a limb rather than crave security. And finally, Lord, never let us forget that it is far better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And tonight, we've lit at least one candle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. My heart fills with loving kindness. I love myself. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be peaceful. May I be free. Those are the first words of a prayer, a kind of meditation that I've come to know very well. And many of you know some version of this prayer as well. It takes a lot of forms. It's known as the Metta prayer of loving kindness. It's connected to the teachings of the Buddha. It continues. May all beings in my vicinity be happy. May they be well. May they be peaceful. May they be free. Now, the words of this prayer move in outward circles from there, from city to state to country, from family to friends to neighbors, kind of from where we live to where we live. And what it's meant to do is to bring these people into your thoughts and to send an intention of love to them out into the world. It's hard sometimes to remember these things, but coming back to this prayer has helped me when anger and fear consume me. Here's the thing about this prayer, though, it gets tricky. May all of my enemies be happy. May they be well. May they be peaceful. May they be free. So enemies. That's a word we don't consider a lot. Personally. I mean, what is an enemy? I had an idea as a kid because I grew up with comic books, right? In comic books, there's Lex Luthor, there's the Joker. They are supervillains. They torment us. In middle school, the boys in the playground were enemies of mine because, well, I read comic books. That was my frame of reference, but not today. But as I began to meditate on this word enemies, I thought it's become clear to me, at least, that it has a very broad application. The guy on Twitter who says horrible, threatening things. The guy on Facebook who demeans and bullies, or the politician who does all of these things from a podium just like this. Is my enemy someone who says that journalists, those who do the work that I do, are bad people who spread lies and should be punished? Is my enemy someone who believes that people should be persecuted for their color, their faith, their political views? Is my enemy the politician who empowers that very persecution? Is my enemy the one who stands during the national anthem or the one who kneels? In a black and white society, if we take a side, then wouldn't the person holding the opposite view of my own, wouldn't that person be my enemy? Is my enemy the man who takes the lives of others in a mass shooting? In Sandy Hook, in Orlando, in Las Vegas, I could go on. If these are acts of pure evil and I consider myself to be a good person, then they must qualify as my enemy. Battles are fought by enemies: conservative versus liberal, Christian versus Muslim, black lives versus all lives. When every exchange is a battle, there's always an enemy or two or 20. As a former president once thought of it, we begin to build an enemies list. And in this world of divisive rhetoric and mean-spirited discourse, my list, the only list I can control, has gotten far too long. Through the creation of that list, my life has become less productive, more stressful, less loving, more fearful. And I need to shorten that list, and I think I know how. I'm going to recite that prayer every day, even when it's hard, even when it's useless, even when it makes me want to scream. May my enemies be happy. May they be well. May they be peaceful. May they be free. If anyone has hurt me knowingly or unknowingly in thought, word, or deed, I extend my forgiveness. May all beings everywhere, whether near or far, whether known to me or unknown, be happy. May they be well. May they be peaceful. And may they be free. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, that was weak. Good evening, everyone. Bless your hearts. In the moments that I've been allotted, I just want you to remember that violence and hate is deeply ingrained in the nation's fiber and fabric. Remember that history reveals that lynching, for example, used to be announced in the churches. The truth is, they would have picnics and they would sell tickets to the event. Never forget that these church folks would watch people die slowly as they hung from the limbs of trees. I want you to remember that slavery was a thing in the South, but it was insured by companies in the North. I want you to remember that women didn't get the right to vote until the 1920s. It didn't happen without a struggle, and likewise, black folks didn't get that right until the mid-60s. So much blood was spilled, yet today the struggle to voting access continues. I want you to remember that Hispanic folks don't need a wall to lock them out, nor do gay folks need a closet to lock them in. Remember how Americans in Puerto Rico, or those standing for justice in Charlottesville, have been treated. Remember, as you do to them, you do it unto me, as a wise one said. Be aware of emboldened hate groups and the face of fascism that still walks among us. And they no longer need sheets and the cover of night to forward their hateful rhetoric and actions or their vile speech. They have cover now from the White House. Remember that Nelson Mandela did not spend 27 years in prison without purpose and determination, nor did he become the president of the nation that imprisoned him without the purpose and determination of the vast majority of South African people. Then remember that this great nation, our nation, has sought to do the right thing throughout its history, but only when pushed. We should push love and welcome in our nation, push religious tolerance in our nation, push justice and not just us in our nation. Push that our nation lives up to its creed. Someone said, it is not about the loyalty that I have for this nation, but rather about the integrity this nation wants me to believe it has. Loving one's nation is about creating a world for all. It's about building a world that never tolerates oppression. And so in these short moments, I ask you to recommit yourself to love your neighbor. I ask you to kneel or to lock arms, but certainly at least to raise your voice for love. Remember that what is common for all of us is the call of God, however you understand that higher presence, to love your neighbor, if only because love still trumps hate.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me to this. I'm very grateful for the experience of having been challenged to think about this over the last few weeks, and especially to think about how to do it in 4 minutes. The novelist Paul Beatty writes of our tendency to preen in the mirror so as to avoid looking in the mirror and remembering where the bodies are buried. For a psychiatrist, that looking in the mirror comes most profoundly when a patient commits suicide. 70% of psychiatrists in America will experience that loss at some point in their career. And this isn't like an oncologist losing a patient to cancer or a cardiologist losing a patient to heart disease. In suicide, the death was not inevitable, and one is always left with self-doubt. But then comes the defensive preening. Hey, I'm a smart psychiatrist. I ask the right questions. It was the patient's choice. I can't be held responsible for things that I can't control. That's protective, but it's preening, and it prevents a deeper look in the mirror. For me, that experience came early in my career in the form of a very depressed, middle-aged man. In the course of about an hour in my office, he gave me every assurance that he wouldn't kill himself, until he suddenly got up from his chair, started pacing, looked me in the eye briefly, and he said, "You know, Doc, I really could do it." But that split second of clarity was gone as fast as it came. He sat down, he returned to his denial. I pressed him, and he said all the right things to placate my concern. I balanced the denials, the multiple denials, with that one admission, and I concluded that he was safe and let him go home. But an alarm had gone off in my gut, an alarm which I ignored at his peril and my regret. So fast forward now to about 2 years ago, a new movement in suicide prevention has arrived. It's called Zero Suicide, and its premise on the face of it is that suicide should become a never event. Now that's a very challenging concept to those of us who have spent our entire professional lives trying to strip the rooms in hospitals of every object that a patient could possibly try to hurt themselves with, and have spent all of these years trying to learn interviewing techniques that would elucidate and illuminate the most nuanced, self-destructive thoughts that a patient could possibly have. And nevertheless, despite those efforts, been defeated by the patient's commitment to self-destruction. We can't, after all, read minds. So zero suicide comes along, and it challenges us to adopt new and out-of-the-box approaches and to apply them in ways that we would never have thought of. My staff wanted to take this on, but I protested. We can't hold ourselves to a standard that we can't meet. I mean, zero? A never event? Really? It's counterintuitive. And if we accept such a standard, we will be held accountable when we fail. But the suicides keep coming. 44,000 in America this year and counting. They keep slipping through our cracks, and gradually I've come to realize that zero shouldn't be seen as a hard metric, not so much a goal as an aspiration that will lead us to do more, to do better, and that looking in the mirror means being willing to stretch, to think outside the box, to accept the risk of being held accountable, indeed to hold ourselves accountable. So we're doing zero suicide. For me, loving my neighbor in the work that I do means looking hard in the mirror at the way we do things, challenging ourselves to change, and realizing it's not about me and how I look or how my team looks or how my hospital looks when we fail, as we sometimes inevitably will, but about every additional life that we can save when we challenge ourselves to save them. Thank you.
What a wonderful gathering. It reminds me a little bit of conversations in classrooms at Hartford Seminary, where we have just this kind of lively interchange. It's a little dangerous to ask an ethics professor to talk about love, but I'll be brief. First, a few words about what, in my interpretation of my religious tradition, the love of neighbor is not. The love of neighbor, in my eyes, has nothing to do with sticky, sweet, feel-good emotion. The love of neighbor also has nothing to do with actions or feelings that may cause one to congratulate oneself, that seem to be focused on the other, but are really more about the self than the other. The love of neighbor has nothing to do, really, with whether one likes the neighbor or not. Liking the neighbor is beside the point. One must love actively even those one dislikes. This is because love of neighbor in my Protestant tradition is an objective obligation. It's not a personal choice or a personal feeling. It is a duty, a way of being that focuses on the other and not the self. It is a deep and abiding understanding that the other absolutely shares one's own humanity and is equally a child of God, regardless of who that other is. Love extended towards the neighbor, the other, or the others, is not undertaken as a reciprocal act. It's an act that is gratuitous. It is an act that one initiates not in order to have it returned or to receive gratitude. No, This is love extended towards the other with no expectation of return, and sometimes it is extended at great risk to the self. Love of neighbor requires that one pay attention to the neighbor, that one see the neighbor clearly in his or her own concreteness. If one clearly sees the neighbor, one may comprehend and see the need in the neighbor and also the gift that is the neighbor. Love of the neighbor is daily, and it is composed of big and little actions taken alone and with others, extended towards individuals and groups. Justice in the economic, social, legal world is often an excellent way to act with love toward the neighbor. The work of justice is messy and imperfect and conflictual. It's hard to tell pretty stories about, but it is nevertheless an excellent form of love of neighbor. So, who is my neighbor? Really, anyone. Everyone. But my tradition teaches that my neighbor is especially those most in need: the lost, the lonely, the outcast, the immigrant, the poor, the despised, the discriminated against, those who are sick or afraid, the prisoner. No one is exempt. While this love is lived out with no expectation of return of any kind, this active, other-regarding love at both the social and a more intimate scale tears down walls, builds bridges, and creates webs of solidarity between and among us. Along the way, it also brings meaning and happiness to the self. Surely this is because this is the way we humans are most fully human. This is the way we were meant to be.
Beautiful, Heidi. I'm Jim Smith. I'm with Webster Bank. I'm so delighted to be here tonight. And I have learned so very, very much. And I don't know that I'll have much to add, but I certainly have gotten a lot out of being here. And it underscores what I think is so very important, is that we need to constantly fill the vessel with positive ideas, with positive thoughts. It's not good enough just to think about it alone. The ability to share it with one another, as we do in tonight's forum, I think is extremely important and is one of the lessons that I take away. So, love thy neighbor, in my mind, ideally, it's a way of life. It's something that we have to work at. It doesn't come automatically, and the constancy of discussion about it is a positive to work to fill the vessel in the most positive way. If we love our neighbors, we're more likely to be tolerant, to be understanding, to be inclusive, and to develop good character, to be willing to give the benefit of the doubt through that constant reinforcement over many, many years, where perhaps before that we might not have been so willing to give the benefit of the doubt. It becomes more natural as we go. It creates constructive, positive reinforcement. And equally important, loving thy neighbor and thinking about it and talking about it all the time makes us less likely to be intolerant or prejudiced or bigoted or biased, less likely to be hostile and hateful or arrogant, and all the bad things that we see in the world that we wish we could do something about, and I think we're actually doing something about it through this conversation that we're having tonight. Love thy neighbor, in my mind, brings all of those good values together. I think of it as the overarching value, that consistent, continual reinforcement from early youth on, as we try to instill in young people the attributes that will help them to develop fully as people, to constantly fill that vessel with those positive thoughts. You know, I wanted to make a point about organizations. And not just religious organizations, which are so vitally important and practice this and preach this every day in the most positive way, but organizations, companies, not-for-profits, that have a vast capacity to positively or negatively influence those that they serve. I think that organizations have personalities that reflect the collective character of the people that are in them. They can be a force for good internally as we live up to one another, and externally as we live up to those that we serve. When I think about love thy neighbor, and I think of the most vivid example for me, I think about my father, who founded a bank back in 1935 in the middle of the Depression to help people buy and build their homes. And he has passed that on to other generations, where we believe that we should be community-minded, values-oriented bankers that make a difference in the lives of the people that we serve. And continually talking about that and making that the most important reason for our existence, I think, has had a positive impact on all of us internally, and I'd like to think on the community as well. I think of my father back in 1935, the picture from the newspaper where my dad is standing on a door stoop of a fellow's house in Waterbury with a check to deliver the first mortgage made by the company, hat in hand, humble banker, living up to his neighbor, loving thy neighbor. Over the years, in memory of my father, we decided to adopt the values that seemed to us to be the principles that he had handed down since he started the company back in the first place to help people buy and build their homes. And over the years, as our mission evolved and our vision expanded, we remembered that it is the values that endure. And those values are what roll up into love thy neighbor. And to this day, those values, whether it's our organization or another, that are constantly reinforced, that include taking personal responsibility for our relationships and respecting the dignity of every individual and earning trust through ethical behavior, giving of ourselves and our communities, and working together to achieve outstanding results. We are continually reinforced as individuals who care and want to make a difference in the lives of the people that we serve. And my wife Kathy and I believe so strongly in this that wherever character can be involved, where there can be reinforcement involved, some of you may remember character counts that we were involved in for a long time. The idea was to be able to talk to kids when they're young and have them understand about the importance of the set of values, which in this case was respectfulness and responsibility and caring and fairness and citizenship and trustworthiness. And so in the end, we think that every opportunity we have to reinforce those values that roll up into love thy neighbor is time very well spent and makes a difference, because it's up to us to make sure that we're constantly communicating what it's about to other people while giving them the benefit of the doubt, not necessarily believing everyone will understand for themselves what loving thy neighbor is all about. I know that in my faith it boils down to, regardless of our religion, that first and foremost we must love our God with our whole heart, our soul, our body, and our spirit. And right after that comes loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. In the end, I think that is actually the reason that we exist. Thank you.
Well, the last one. Yes. I first want to, before you start the clock, you can't see it, but when you finish, it turns red and it starts pulsing. But I wanted to make mention Oz Grable. I'm Deacon Art Miller from St. Mary's Church in Simsbury, and I've gotten to know Oz over the years. And here's what I know. When I first met him, Oz believes in that old axiom, why use 50 words when 5,000 will do? Thank you, Oz. And Howard, thank you. Of the two comments you made regarding me, there's only one there's a slight correction, and that is that it is not my proverb. It is an old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The other comment you made was that I was good looking, and I'm not going to disagree with you on that. It is an extraordinary thing to be here to talk with you about love. And I want to tell you that I am motivated and driven by the times that I fail, as opposed to the times that I succeed. And I want to tell you a story about a time I failed to love. Now, I know that some of you have heard this story, but please bear with me. When I was about 12 years old, there was a little girl in my class that liked me. She wrote little notes. Dear Art, I like you. Who do you like? Please check the box. And there are little girls' names, and I was 12 and I was afraid of girls, so I used to throw the notes away. But every day I'd get into class and I'd open up, the old desks, and there was a little note to Art Miller. Dear Art, I like you. Who do you like? Please check the box. And I throw the note away. But one of the things that I noticed, the little girl, whose name was Victoria Hawkins, was bullied constantly. I never bullied her, but she was teased. I remember that at lunch she sat alone, no one sat with her, and they would knock her milk over. She would slowly and quietly clean it up, go about eating her lunch. And at recess, she would play in the middle. While the boys played on one side, the girls on the other. She played alone in the middle. I never bullied her, but each day I'd come to school, and there'd be a little folded up note. Dear Art, I like you. Who do you like? Please check the box. And this happened in 7th grade. In 8th grade, it was not as much. Then we all went to high school. I'm from Chicago, and our high schools are really large. And my class alone, there were about 1,000 kids in my freshman class. And Victoria was in that as well. Now, I'm a nerd, and I had honors classes, and so did Victoria. Now, in our classes, she was never, ever bothered. But on the way from one class to another, from geometry to history, you could see her crying. And at the end of the day, she always tried to leave early so that no one would bother her. By our freshman year, she had ceased sending me notes. At that time, she continued to be bullied. Our freshman year, our sophomore year, our junior year. When our senior year finally dawned, Victoria did not go to the senior prom. And in fact, when we walked for our diplomas, she didn't even walk. Although I know she graduated because she received one of the honors as a National Honor Society member. Now, that summer was 1963. Yes, I'm 72. I know I look good for 72. But that summer of 1963, I really began being involved in the civil rights movement. I heeded the call of Dr. King and began to do all of the sit-ins and the demonstrations against what I saw and believed and experienced was a racist country. That summer of 1963 in August, before the I Have a Dream speech, I was arrested and put in jail before I went off to college at the University of Illinois. And during that time, I felt that I was doing what I was called to do. I was standing up for what was right. But it was also during that time I realized I never once stood up for Victoria Hawkins. I failed to love my neighbor. You see, when we're called to love our neighbor, it is when it is difficult that it's really good. You know, loving someone when they're nice and warm to you is easy. But when you love someone when it's difficult, when there is something that you must risk, makes it sacred. You see, all of us, we in here are called to sacred love. In this holy place that we have made holy, we are to walk out of this place that I'm going to call the locker room. Because you see, in the locker room, you come together to see who your teammates are. You come together to see what everyone believes. And you come in here to recognize that every one of us has a different position. You need to know that you are called to love one another. And you cannot leave it here in the locker room. Because it does absolutely no good for you to love somebody up in here, because everybody up in here is going to tell you the same thing. What your obligation is to go out there where it's difficult, where it's hard, where somebody might talk about you, where someone might even hate you. But you got to love them anyway. That's what we're called to. You can't leave this place saying, good for me, I did my part. Oh, no, that's too easy. No, we've got to go out there, and if you believe what we've talked about today, if you've gathered in here to do exactly that, then that's what we're called to do. Let's leave this place loving everybody, and no one can stop you from doing that. And I believe there is an 11th commandment, and that 11th commandment reads, "Thou shalt not be a bystander." May God bless absolutely every single one of you with sacred love. Amen.
148 years ago today, Mahatma Gandhi was born. He wasn't Mahatma then, he was merely Mohandas. Mahatma means venerated, and it is something that he grew into, as maybe can we. Events and people can change things. Gandhi changed a lot, all for the better. So can we. That's our challenge. Art said it better than I can by a long shot. But we can change things too. This evening is not about last words. The last word on love, the last word on respect, the last word on interreligion. But I will say this about last words. I do not want in our world the last words to be words of hatred. If there has to be a last word at this moment in our world and in our time, it cannot be bad that the words that we have exchanged will be in our minds as last words from this evening. Words like love and neighbor and respect and understanding and hope. Those are really great last words to carry from this place. And I'm going to offer two more for your consideration. They're what I feel for you and what you can use for each other as well. Those two last final words are thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you. Who ever thought that simply saying thank you could become an alternative political act? And yet, that's where we are. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.